I am Laura Bucheri, the Director of Publicity at Copper Canyon Press, and you are watching our new interview series, Line Break, which goes off the page and into the homes and minds of our poets. I've always had the dream of seeing, more poets represented on screen, talking shop, answering questions, and kind of taking us behind the scenes of how they do what they do. So in this episode, we are speaking with Rachel McKibbins. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. How's your day going?
Hell yeah. It's been pretty chill. Watched Lady Gaga sing the national anthem
That was
uh
great.
minutes ago, and I was tempted to tweet Gaga is greater than MAGA, but I was like, I'm on a social media kind of like a hiatus uh for, I wanted to be on hiatus for all of winter, but I still have to like kind of keep up with my peeps because I live very far away from people
Yeah.
I love, with the exception of my family, who I've been in, semi quarantine with for since March.
It's almost a year. It's almost a year. That would have been a great tweet, by the way. Like if you've been on hiatus, that's like the one tweet that you come back
Yeah,
with.
it was like, but I'm like pro Gaga out of everything else I could do right now. Like, never mind. Like, it's
That's
fine,
fair.
fine, but like, no, I've been thinking like simmering on a joke or like just some fuck shit, talking trash to you, but
I love that. Well, I'm wondering if you would mind doing a quick intro.
sure.
Maybe like name, pronouns, where you live, most recent book you published, anything else you want to say.
Okay. My name is Rachel McKibbins. I've been debating for literally 8 years whether or not to drop my ex-husband's last name. I was born Rachel Ann Camacho in Anaheim, which is why my middle name is Ann. Ann from Anaheim. Corny.
Oh,
Isn't that horrible? But anyways, I grew up just minutes from Disneyland. And like all the other little cholas in Santa Ana, California, it was so funny because like we'd have these big bangs and then rock our Mickey Mouse hats and then fight bitches. That's ridiculous. My pronouns are she, her. Although I do like fem, them mixed together. The them, THEMME, has been like a thing where I'm like, the minute I saw that, I felt really seen. My most recent book published is Blood by on Copper Canyon, bleep, of course. But the most recent book that I'm reading is Wound from the Mouth of a Wound by Torrin A. Greathouse on Milkweed, which is fucking amazing. And I'm embarrassed to say that I was supposed to blurb it and was sent this a long time ago, but it was during hardcore protests in our city. So I didn't even see this, and it got tucked under mail. My mail is like this. So I found this 2 days ago and I'm like, oh my God. And
that's such a gift.
I'm such a piece of shit. No, I was supposed to blurb it. It's already out now. And I'm like, oh my God. But it's such a stunning book, and I really, Family Portrait as Unfinished Meal is such a phenomenal poem. Go buy the book, please. Even though it's not on Copper Canyon, I'm gonna fucking boost that.
No, milkweed is amazing. Milkweed is
I'm about
amazing.
to.
Yeah.
Even if the rules or aren't the rules, I'm gonna
No, there
break.
are no rules.
I'm
Come
always gonna.
on.
Let's just do this. Just kidding.
um,
I'm in
well, I
Rochester.
appreciate that.
I'm in upstate New York. Sorry.
Yeah.
Moved to New York in 2003, and I'm very close to the Canadian border, which matters not because they will never let us in again. Uh,
Never.
I mean, they already give me a hard time when I come over for previous infractions as a young chola. So they often, I mean, I'm always taken aside and given like an hour-long grilling.
Even so, when you're crossing by car, they take you aside.
Bus or car. They did it by car so often that I went to the bus. I was like, it'll be different. Nope. And I'm like, wow, you really had me hold up everyone on this fucking bus? Like,
Oh
legit.
my God.
Yeah. So
They
that's
just wanted your autograph.
never pull your tampon out and throw it at an off-duty police officer.
Ooh, that's a good PSA.
It's a felony, I guess.
I had
Bull.
no idea.
Boring.
God.
Anyway.
Well, I wonder if we could, since you brought up your childhood with your Mickey Mouse hat or ears on, I'm wondering if we could go back a bit to when you
uh,
first started writing poetry, which might not have been the same time as the Mickey Mouse situation. It might have been later than that. But I'm wondering, because I've seen you, I mean, I've obviously read poems by you on the page in your book, but I've also seen you perform poetry.
yes.
And so I'm wondering, when you first started writing, were you writing for the page? Were you performing poetry? Did you know you were writing poetry? How take us back?
Oh, that's a really cool question. Like, I've had always been a short story writer and a playwright all through junior high and high school, and I would do like really kind of like surrealist fiction, and then I had a nervous breakdown after performing in my senior play where I essentially had to play my dad. I had never had alcohol in my life at that point. I was 18. I had a 1-year old son, and I was also homeless, unbeknownst to the rest of like my teachers or classmates. And so I think having to climb into essentially my dad and reenact, drunken violence, it really did a thing. And so I was turned off of acting, which everyone thought I was going to be in Hollywood. I was going to become this great like star. But back in the day, um, when I was trying to venture into like theater and like commercials and movie work, they were like, if you don't speak Spanish, like you are so ethnic looking, right? And I'm like the fucking whitest Mexican in my family. Like everyone else is dark except for me. And because I'd always been called Weta and like, little white girl and stuff by my own family members, I had this perception of self that was very different than Hollywood. They were like, look at you. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
And they were like, you're only literally ever going to be on Telemundo. And I was like, well, I don't know enough Spanish. Like, what the fuck am I going to do? So I was really in limbo, and I was homeless, and I had a child on my hip. And it wasn't until I was in this punk rock group, 902 Wino, and I was the singer. And my bandmate, we had both been voted class clown in high school. He was our bassist, and he died of a heroin overdose. And that was such a transformative experience for me, because that level of grief, not knowing how to channel, I mean, the all of that was so intense for me that all I could do was write him letters, like angry letters. And I eventually took it a step further and read one of those letters at an open mic and burst into tears, ran off the stage, never to be seen again. And then, one of the people who was there at the open mic stopped me and like, oh my gosh, you read that beautiful poem about your friend who was plugged into the wall. Because at one point he had been on life support. And they called it a poem. And that was not familiar to me. All of the poetry I'd ever been introduced to in high school was, by crunchy old white men who
Yeah,
were
me
who were
too.
writing about nature, and I just could not fucking relate to them. And so calling that a poem was like step one. And then also finding a poetry section at Tower Records, uh, old school play. I
Or
don't know, or like it dates me, but who cares? That was such a cool place because they would have all this music and then a lot more like punk rock zines and um, you know, poetry books by like drunks and shit. And so I got introduced to Charles Bukowski, which I think is a horrible gateway drug. However, because of the way I wrote, and I was compared to certain names and I looked them up and I'm like, oh, okay. Like this too is a crazy mother. Great. Like I could relate, I related immensely to Sexton. Not as much to Plath, but then Lucille Clifton's work, I was like,
Mhm.
oh, right. And then Cisneros, and then like it's this great moment for the self where you're like, oh, okay, so this is who I'm in dialogue with. And so I didn't even start writing poetry until I was 24. And I know I feel like I was really late into it, but just as I was just starting to read often. Hi, dear. On the open mics, they started a poetry slam in this lesbian bar in Long Beach, and I literally thought it would involve actual physical contact because my own personal context sort of like heard slam, and all I could think of was, oh, I get to like hurt a bitch. And so it wasn't until, of course, I was there and I was like, what? Because a lot of people don't know I'm a former jock also. Like, I was on the basketball team, you know, I
What
was
position were you?
power forward, constantly elbowing all of the white suburban kids from from Irvine, California. These weird events I sort of like tumbleweeded through, and a lot of it still kind of shapes how I approach poetry, how I approach writing. Um, you know, and to not be a learned poet, like I didn't go to college, never studied poetry, was teaching workshops before I was ever actually in one. You know, I've always just sort of kind of slipped in through the cracks in my own way, whether it be like the literal judicial system, the social services system, the literary world, like all of that. I sort of just sort of boop.
So, but then so then when did you start? You said you started writing poetry at 24, but then when did you start kind of realizing that you could also perform poetry? You could write poetry for the performance, or were they one and the same?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was just writing poetry to not commit felonies. Like, I was also trying to navigate the particular culture I grew up, Mexican gang culture. You don't fucking snitch on your family. You don't name shit, right? Like, so to understand how poetry and, you know, and all of its devices allowed me to tell the truth slant, of course, really was a saving grace for me. And I don't think I don't think I'd be where I'm at in terms, like, just on a psychological level, if it wasn't for the ability to not only write what I needed to no longer have it like clog my arteries, but to also be a student of witness and to listen to other writers tell their stories and to find community in that way. And I think it was, I mean, my natural ability. I mean, so remember, I was an athlete who became a theater nerd who then, you know, like was writing. And so it was a very natural unfurling for me to end up within the poetry slam scene. But I was out there, like, I was winning slams with sonnets about Lacey Peterson. In 2003, I had this poem about suicidal ideation and about not having a mom, and about, I mean, it was essentially those two things. But I remember the last line was, I've had 24 chances to have one good year. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I don't want another turn. And then to just stop right there, for me to be in a poetry slam where there's like 150 people in the audience. This is at the Poetry Lounge in Hollywood, Fairfax High School. Phenomenal uh, slam, one of the best ones I'd ever been to. And I had just followed all of these other poets who were so, like, such beautiful big personalities, anthemic poetry, and then I just stood still and just talked about wanting to die. um and and I loved that I would get zeros and tens for the same poem, right? Like, there were the people that were tapped into and like understood what the fuck was happening, and there are others who was like, this is absolutely not something you put on stage as performance. But like, I wasn't there to perform, I was just there to share my work. And so I didn't I I had a very small group of folks who were always rooting for me, and then there was a whole other team of folks who are always like, "What? This is a chaotic person. Like, I don't know what they're gonna read about." Um, but you know, I mean, I was out there telling my stories and trying to be as honest as possible, and um, I
Were
think
you
that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, were you also in the band and Did you keep doing plays?
No, those things, no. So I stopped doing plays after I had my little mini nervous breakdown when I was 18 and in high school. Then I was homeless. And I was sleeping on couches and I was in a band. Remember I was homeless with a child, which was not easy. And then I ended up moving in with my boyfriend who was also the drummer. And I didn't really writing until we split up. So I finally this was an abusive relationship, which is really wild when people find out that I was even in one. They're like, there's just no fucking way you tolerated that. And I'm like, you don't know my upbringing. That shit was normal to me. Like it made sense. It's shit I was used to. It was feeling comfortable that made me fucked up. Like it was any moments of stillness or quiet where I was suspicious all the time. So that level of chaos wasn't anything I thought to escape. It was very familiar to me. But once I finally broke it off for the final time with him, and at this point I had 2 kids, and then our bassist died, I sort of, I was, I had to shed the former skin of so many selves in that moment. And that I just happened to start into poetry is still such a wildly, I mean, I was definitely guided by my people. um, I've always had the dead behind me. I've always been supported by my ancestors and by folks I've met along the way. I know that for a fact. I've been saved too many times in such weird ways, too often for me to not recognize the power of, the afterlife community.
Yeah.
Like that's real.
I
There
mean,
are
poetry people in general,
sure,
dead or alive, you know?
yeah, I absolutely. And if if I'm to outlast myself even, I think it's just through the work, through the word. Like that's just how the fuck we move on. That's how we grieve, it's such an important ritual, the word. And I'm going to always pay homage to those who shaped me, who misshaped me. um I
Yeah.
just, I see value in all of it.
I
Important. Death is my teacher, but life is the long lesson. And so I'm like constantly trying to understand and listen and have an awareness that I think is really required of a poet or of any artist. Just finally be able to be at peace with my surroundings and name them in a way, or former surroundings, has been such a gift. Which I would, I think about my brother who doesn't write, who doesn't share, who doesn't reveal. And I understand that that is just not, it's an unlife, it's a non-life, which I don't want to out someone for that, but like I truly understand how unwitnessed he is. He doesn't have support because he just doesn't speak. And so I think part of my duty too is to let him kind of be witness to his own self sometimes through my work. Very careful about that. You don't want to exploit, fellow survivors. You don't want to, it's just such a fine line, but I didn't start sending work out until years into it. Because before I'd be solicited by folks within the slam scene who are starting a little online journal. This is like before Twitter, before Facebook, all that. Like I was just putting my shit up for free on LiveJournal. Like that made sense to me. And I still I like to write chapbooks that are specifically for a reading, one reading only. And that book can only be purchased in that moment. And
exclusive.
those poems I wiped from my computer, so I don't even have them anymore. It's art that belongs now to someone else. Someone's like, aren't you afraid of someone who's been plagiarized? Like, aren't you scared to like give someone your work? And I'm like, I wrote the poem and I gave it away and it's done its job I needed it to do for myself, and whatever it does in the future, like I surrender. Like I can't, And it bothers people so much sometimes that there's work like that that exists. But for me, art, I like art to be a very shared, intimate experience sometimes, like even more exclusively so. And so, I mean, it's not like I think too, like I have former lovers who have poems that no one else has ever seen. Y'all
Sure.
aren't worried about that. So I'm okay with being in the room with someone and giving, Scott a book of poems that only he has. And you know, I signed it. He could sell it someday to no one. No one will buy my shit. No, I'm just kidding.
I
Uh,
disagree.
I,
The
I think
Canadian Border Patrol will.
right. Oh my God. That's funny. They actually made me recite a poem off the top of my head. Yeah, Canadian.
Why? To test if you were a poet?
Yeah, because I surely didn't look like one.
What did you recite?
We don't all look like Margaret Atwood. So I recited letter from my heart to my brain, letter from my brain to my heart.
Oh,
Uh
that's one of my favorite poems of
yeah,
yours.
like and the first time I was held by the Canadian Border Patrol, I was actually nursing a fucking 6-week-old baby. And like I didn't have a birth certificate. Well, I didn't know to get to Detroit, I like was gonna veer off and go a little bit through. I didn't know that. And then I was stuck and I was like, oh fuck. And I literally had milk leaking down the front of my shirt. I'm telling them when my book Pink Elephant is coming out, on what press, what is the date, all this stuff. It was just really wild. I've always had an unfortunate time with the Canadian.
Wow. That is
Hilarious.
wow. Um, I wonder if you are I know at least from knowing you a little bit that you're doing a lot of like activism, you're out there protesting, you are using kind of your body and your voice in that way these days. But do you feel as though you're also inclined to write, or do you feel as though you're doing mostly things in your community kind of physically?
I think at this point that's really the most I can do.
Yeah.
We opened up a spot here downtown that's like feet from the police precinct. We're against City Hall, and it's where a lot of the hot spot of the Black Lives Matter protesting was happening. And we just were convenient enough to where we were having to sort of protect and shield some protesters from, the fuck shit that was happening. They were shooting expired tear gas at folks. My daughter, who was on the front line all summer, has like 3 periods a month now. There are so many, there's so much trauma that has yet to be really addressed properly, because you had the pandemic, then you had, right, like severe racialized injustice happening. You had cities that were coming after their citizens, treating them like insurgents. And the best we could do really was open up our spot and offer sanctuary. And there was a night where um, they gassed out the sanctuary church across the parking lot from us, the back door. And so at one point we had a bunch of medics and people who just had like the fumes. So I was actually cooking at this time. I push open the back door, come in, and I'm still in the kitchen. And at one point I thought I spilled cayenne, and that the air intake had put it up my nose and my eyes, and it was just everyone passing by with fumes. And so, oh shit. And then I looked and there was a literal tank coming down the alley, and we shut the door. And it was such a brutal, devastating night. I can't imagine writing about it. I mean, I don't know, maybe, but I definitely I'm never able to write within like the eye of the hurricane. I have to be
Yeah,
really away from it to be safe enough to put language to it and to properly assess it. Um,
I
but
get that.
I think that too, just I don't know. I mean, I understand that it's important. All perspectives are important, but right now, black black folks and their voices should be centered in all of this. They have not for so long. Our country is supremely damaged and so far behind because of that very like
Fact.
uncentering
Yeah.
of Black voices. So that I feel like if anything, all I'm really supposed to do is provide shelter. It's what I've been doing with, the writing retreat I hold, Pink Door, like
Before, yeah.
10th anniversary. And really the only thing that's ever really been is an opportunity to provide space so that community can come together and build its own organic, beautiful, fucking sounds so kumbaya, like, but bridge to each other. I'm not hands-on. I think people have a different idea, but I'm out there stirring beans and polishing, you know, silver plate thrifted forks. I'm not, everyone else, like it's up to them to create the space for themselves. And it's such a beautiful thing. And I think that really as someone who is absolutely against the prison industrial complex, and who's against police, and who's very invested in community revolution and rehabilitation and restoration, I'm just gonna stay that person.
Yeah.
For I mean, whether I write about it or not, it's still fucking happening. I'm still doing work. I'm still a poet. And it took me a long time to think of, because I was like, I haven't written in 3 years. It's like I haven't felt the need to do that specific thing, but it's not like I'm still not working, right? It's not like I'm not attempting to propel folks to the front who
Yeah.
have, not been given that opportunity. Like that's just what it is. The poetry, it just because it saved me once doesn't mean necessarily that I have to, revert back to
Use it
that.
every time. Yeah.
Like I'm just still, yeah, like, I have witty signs, protest signs, because I'm a poet, right?
Yes.
We at the Star Wars Imperial March at the fucking state police as they lined up in front of our little cocktail bar where we serve booze out of teacups on doilies. And
Hmm.
that's us as poets. My partner's a poet too, and we run this spot, and like only I think a poet could have really responded in the ways that we did during those protests and during those attacks. And I'm really here for anyone who's willing to, put your fucking chin over your feet and do that work without accolades. It's not, that should
Yeah.
never be the point, that should never be the point. Just as like, there's a million beautiful books that have never won an award, and they're still some of the best books I've ever read. And, you
Hmm.
know, recognition, I guess it could be nice, but at the end of the day, like you cannot fucking unname my life, my stories. You cannot rewrite shit for me because I've always done that. And that's been important to me to even allow, as I've said to friends lately who are delving into um creative nonfiction and fiction. I'm like, well, just make sure that you're honest. Even your fiction is honest. Doesn't have to be true, but it better fucking be honest. And so that's what I'm trying to do with my work
Wow.
in every way, whether it's poetry or a fucking bowl of grits or throwing back a gas can
Yeah. Yeah.
into a line of cops. Like I wholeheartedly believe in fuck the police. I wholeheartedly believe in the power of art as, rehabilitative and completing and creating a functioning society and community. And that's just never going to stop till the day I die. And even then, like, I'll hopefully have instilled in my children the same, level of recognition. I'm doing my best to not raise an accountant,
Yeah. Sure.
bottom line.
Sure. Sure.
Or at least to
Well,
have one that's like, a fucking misfit accountant, dope, amazing. But they're
I
gonna know the
love.
difference between race and class. They're gonna
Sure.
know who the fuck, Era D. Matthews is. They're gonna know who Dominique Christina is. They're gonna know who Jericho Brown is. Like, they're gonna know this shit while they're working numbers. Like, if they must, you know, in every aspect, I think that, my kids are well rounded because of poetry and because of the organization that they've been of witness to, that they've been a part of. All of that shit, feeds the soul, makes us better writers and people.
Yeah. No, better humans. I
Here for-
wonder I wonder if you might read us a poem.
Sure.
Um, I would love to hear one.
Go buy some pinto beans for my cook.
Hi. Okay. Okay.
Swap out. Why is no one texts me and then suddenly everyone's texting during this? Well, let me think about what we were talking about, and then
Sure.
I guess what I'll read
Ooh.
is, don't listen to me, I'm just being corny. Thank you for having me, Laura. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to just,
Oh my gosh. Thank you for being here.
Adult conversation that doesn't have Phineas and Ferb in the background. I'll read the second time because I love it. And I've been thinking about this girl a lot. I think for troubled queer kids growing up, especially in within a culture that I did so much, the machista fucking bullshit of the Chicana lifestyle. It was really hard. And think about this young girl who asked me this question all the time. The second time was in my classmate's mouth, lying on the floor of her baby blue bedroom. She asked, "Do you think you're a boy or a girl?" And everything inside me came bruising to the surface. "Neither," I said, and it was understood. In that charged silence, she rolled over, draped her wronged body over mine as if to anchor the damaged bastard to stay. She listened to the awakened heat of me, its bright song infecting my blood. Our feral bodies, driven by unmothered chaos, returned each other to the living. All hail the power of a proper finger fuck and the wet demolition of shame. What I had once mistaken for death was instead a door. That's my poem.
Rachel, God, thank you.
Of
That's
course.
like, I love that. I love you. I appreciate you for being here and taking the time and reaching back into history a little bit.
Oh.
And well, yeah, I just appreciate it. And I hope, I hope to see you maybe physically soon.
I don't know. We'll see. I don't even know how to like be near people.
That's fine. Well, maybe I'll see you on Zoom.
Love you back. So grateful for you. And I almost read your book, a poem out of
Please.
And I was like, oh, this will be so embarrassing for Laura.
I want to turn red.
I had it in my hands.
No. I'm glad you didn't. Well, thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time.
Hey, bye.